said at the beginning of the service, this is the third in our sermon series for Lent, which is taken from the Abingdon Preaching Journal this year. And I just want to remind you that the first week was a time of learning. And we talked about how important it is to learn. And that in our times of wilderness, sometimes that's when we learn the most. We learn the most about ourselves. We learn quite a lot about the people around us. But we learn also about our relationship with God. And then last week, Sandra talked about the wilderness time and challenges. And that, we encounter challenges every time that we go through the wilderness. But we can overcome those challenges. And, sometimes we see challenges as something to shy away from, to run away from. But actually, when we face challenges head on, then we can grow through that time. And this week is a time of dependence. Now, I'm going to repeat that. Dependence. Because I know in this church, we have 95% of people who are independent. So I'm going to keep saying that word, dependence, because it's really important for this time in our Lenten series. And I'm interested that when we talk about dependence, I'm talking about a dependence that's fully giving of ourselves to somebody else to help us. So if we talk about it in our perspective of relationships, if we are fully dependent on other people, we can't be dependent just in our mind or just on this act or this act. It's got to be fully dependent in my heart and soul and body. And for most of us, that's hard. I'm looking around the room and going, oh, no, I can't do that. Some people have accidents that leave them paralyzed and in a place where they have to depend on other people all the time. Now, they could depend on those people for their physical needs, but if they hold back part of themselves, they don't live a fulfilling life. And that's how it is with God. You see, sometimes we say, we sing about being dependent on God, and yet we like to be very independent of God and to fix up things ourselves. And I love that first reading. That first reading that was the excerpts from We Are Dependent on God. So the student getting ready for the final test says, I'm going to rely on you, God. Oh yeah. In this moment, I'm going to give everything I am to you, so if you can maybe just pass my exams. And there's a reason why we got needed to read that reading. If you're driving your car at 80 or 100 miles an hour, and suddenly somebody's crossing in front of you, that is not the time to rely on God, because you need to take some responsibility for not driving at 80 to 100 miles an hour, unless it's an 80 to 100 mile an hour road. So when we talk about dependence on God, there has to be some action from each of us. And dependence is like a reliance. And most of us are aware what it's like to rely on individuals for our needs and our well-being. And I know that some of us have been reading Rose's messages about what it's like to rely on other people for certain things. When we're strong and private and we need stuff our way, it's very debilitating to rely on somebody else. Some of us have to rely on service dogs to get us around. Some of us have to rely on others for transport to get us around. And sometimes we're okay accepting those little things. But when it comes to more than that, and it comes to our relationship with God and relying on God, we kind of fall down a little bit. The times that we don't have a clue of what is happening. When we are relying and depending on God, it doesn't matter. Because whatever will happen, and God will take us through that time. Some would say that the wilderness time is complete dependence on God. Because if we don't take that time to step aside and to rely on God and to really be present with God, then it's really hard to depend on God. There are several examples through the Bible about how God has been a faithful God to so many. But faithful in the way that they needed, not in the way that they wanted. And the writer of the sermon series talks about manna from heaven. And how manna from heaven, they wanted the manna to come down from heaven like now, all of it, for the next 6 weeks. God gave them what they needed in that day. And that reminds us about the Lord's Prayer. And many of us like to say or sing the Lord's Prayer, but do we really listen to what that means? Give us our day, our daily bread. Don't give us today enough food for the next 15 weeks, unless it's a hurricane season. But give us today, please God, give us today what we need today so that we can serve you and be all that we are. And yet so often we are so independent, many of us have stockpiles of hundreds of things. How many of you got a stockpile of stuff in your cupboards? Oh, they're slowly coming up the hands, yes. We seem unable in this society to be able to live in the presence of the day. The writer of the series recorded a situation that happened with a man that was the head of his family. And he had a wife and 3 children, 2 boys and a young disabled girl who had many medical needs. And suddenly he lost his job. And he was unemployed for a while. And he shared with this author that he had to learn to live daily in a way he never had before. The church as a body surrounded him, and various members of the church helped him with food and prayer and support. And they literally did not know from day to day where their food was coming from. I don't know how many of you in this place have been in that situation where you had no idea where your next food was coming from. He had to live in a wilderness, and he really understood what it meant to pray, God, give me today what I really need. Give me today my daily bread. We can do things to support each other when others allow us, in our independence. But to pray and be present with God and to allow that moment to speak to us is when we start to truly depend on God. And understanding that God will take us where we need to go. There are so many people in the Bible who depended on God. And sometimes it's good to think about these images. You know, the image of the shepherd and that one sheep that had to depend on God so that it would be returned to the fold. The sheep are dependent on the shepherd. And once they can't find the shepherd, they don't know what to do. Have you ever seen sheep? Have you ever seen them go round and round and round and round bushes? They can't stop until somebody tells them that they can stop. We're very much like that as human beings. We seriously are. We keep doing the same things over and over and over again and expecting a different result. How would it be if we stopped doing the same thing over and over again and allowed ourselves to be in a wilderness so that we could learn to engage fully in a relationship with God that was dependent on God? Most of us are taught, probably from an early age, that dependence is bad and independence is good. And it seems to me that it's a weakness, and I put my hand into this one, to be dependent. And yet to be dependent on God is a strength in our relationship with God. When you talk about the Bible and we talk about the vine, if we use that imagery, God is the vine and we are the branches. If there is no vine, there are no branches. Indeed. I don't know how many of you have been to Hampton Court Palace in London. It's a beautiful historic building, and it has many areas that you can visit. There's a grapevine there that was planted in 1768. 17, I will repeat that for Americans, 1768. And some of its branches are 200 feet long, and its single root is 2 feet thick. And because of skillful cutting and pruning, that one vine produces more than 600 pounds of black grapes every year. 600 pounds of black grapes every year. And even though some of the smaller branches are 200 feet from this main stem, they bear plenty of fruit because they are joined to the vine and now allow the life of that vine to flow through them. How much fruit could we produce if we allowed the vine, God, to flow through us? Jesus, in the Gospels, we hear his story of the wilderness. And I believe that he understands that time of loneliness and despair. He understands it because he was there too. He had to go through everything so that we would understand that what he said was, I know what you feel. He was tested. And he was tested in a way that some of us would not have gotten through. But he got through that time. And he came out and he leant on God to carry him through the rest of his journey. Each of us can get through anything in our lives when we stop looking at our independence, what we can get out of something, what will be beneficial to us. And when we depend on God and listen to what comes back, we will receive strength beyond measure when we rely on God. And if we are feeling weak, then I would suggest that we need to reevaluate where we are in our dependence upon God. The author shared this story, and I really liked it. A boy and his father were walking along the road when they came across a large stone. And the boy said to the father, "Do you think if I use all of my strength, I can move this rock?" And his father answered, "If you use all of your strength, I'm sure you can do it." The boy began to push the rock. Now I have an image of the boy being this big and the rock being like 25 feet. And he exerted everything about himself into it, and he pushed and pushed. And guess what? The rock didn't move. So discouraged, he spoke to his father, and he said, "You were wrong. I can't do it." And the father placed his arm around the boy's shoulder and said, "No, son, you didn't use all your strength. You didn't ask me for help." How many of us try to push huge rocks and forget to ask for strength from God to get us through it? I pray this week that you will find ways to be more in relationship with God and more dependent upon God. Amen.
Amen. So this morning, as I was driving here to church, I was thinking about legacy and what it is that we're doing. And I recently found out, one of my uncles, I'm half Colombian, so half my family's in Colombia. One of my uncles has opened up a museum, and he turned his grandmother's house into a museum, and they've got all kinds of wonderful things from the colonial times. And that's his way of creating a legacy. And I was thinking, well, what am I doing to create a legacy? Should I, or what am I going to do? And I thought, well, I am, in a way, creating a legacy. I'm a member of this community. I'm supporting it. And we are all creating a legacy. I don't know if you realize that, how important it is. Wyatt and David and Al and Bart have been here from the beginning. And all of us have joined them, and we're supporting and creating this legacy that extends beyond our personal lives. This legacy is important because it extends to the community. And it's not easy. There are challenges to be met, as Sandra reminded us. How we face those challenges is important. Face them with God. Let Him be your strength. Make decisions as to how you can contribute, how much. This time, next time, it comes and it goes. Sometimes more, sometimes less. And know that you're not alone in this. We're dependent on each one of us. We are all dependent together in doing this. So I encourage you and I invite you to give as you're able to and continue this legacy. And as the ushers come forward, I would like to invite you to join us in singing I've Got Peace Like a River. This is a different rhythm. It's funky and it's syncopated. And I'm sure you're going to enjoy it as much as I do. So please rise and lift your voices to God.